What we have before us here is the almighty small block Chevy in one of its most advanced forms. This boat that it's in is a 2005 model year Malibu. The model of the engine is the Monsoon 340. This boat is in immaculate condition, but it had a major issue, and this major issue really stretched my brain fibers. When it's really simple, it's just very hard to comprehend what's going on here. These computers are quite expensive, so I ended up going on YouTube, finding a fellow YouTuber,
MaicSalazarDiagnostics.
He is in Virginia. I contacted him about the issue. He called me that night, talked me through it, talked me through the shipping and repair process, and we decided to do a video on both ends of it and share it with people that are unsure what to do when they have a failed computer. Now, it is not an inexpensive service, but it is less money than buying a new computer, and in this case it was back at my doorstep in 1 week. So huge shout out to him. Check out his channel so you can understand more on the subject that you might be dealing with. He filled me in on the operation of the system and answered questions that I had, and when the computer came back, it's a working computer, but the human still needed to intervene and make the system operate correctly. So just waiting on the owner of the boat to come here. He's actually my sandblaster, and he's been very good to me over the years, so other mechanics gave up and I saw it through. I started it, and I know that it's real close now. The last time I worked on this, I could not figure out why I couldn't get the angle correct, and it's because I wasn't installing the jumper with it off. So don't make that mistake, because the computer really doesn't like it. Hello, welcome. If you're familiar with this channel, you're familiar with the host. If you're not, then I welcome you.
You see the kid looking straight into the camera. I love it.
At this channel, I try to take my learned experience and knowledge and I relay it to people, knowing that if I have found myself in a scenario that I couldn't get out of, there's a very good chance that there are other people in the same scenario. So in this episode, I'm going to be covering what I feel to be, if not the top, definitely top 3 most ridiculous diagnostic repair scenarios I've ever encountered. It's important to note that, and please don't take this as me being overly confident or relaying my ego or whatever, but I am a thoroughly trained, well-experienced mechanic of all of the eras. I've done a lot, and I'm very proud to say that choosing this industry and choosing something that I was innately attracted to and good at, it was a good choice. But over the years, I have run into some scenarios with vehicles, boats, you name it, that just broke my mind. So this episode is going to be about going through a scenario with a boat that I felt like I couldn't solve, and it pushed me to my absolute limit. I mean, it brought me to the point where I was doubting my own ability, and I felt like I was being tortured. So, without further ado, let's introduce the subject of today's video. The subject of today's video is a 2005 model year Malibu boat with the Monsoon 340 5.7 liter multi-port fuel injection engine. Now, this engine is a small block Chevrolet, which in my career I have had my hands on, near, around a small block Chevy for as long as I can remember. I built my first small block Chevy when I was 18, going on 19, and I know these things inside and out. The operating systems that they use, I'm also very familiar with, working on most of the road-going versions that they had, all of their distributors, you name it, I've seen it. When I went into this repair, the original call was concerning the boat had a sudden loss of power. It shut down after a slight stumble, and it did not restart. The fuel pump would not prime, and the customer, who is a good friend of mine, he happens to do all of my abrasive blasting work. He's a very mechanical fellow, and he's been around the block enough times where he got into it, and he did all of the obvious first steps. All the ingredients are here, and I can't see why this isn't working. So at that point, he deemed the distributor to be the source of the failure. And in doing so, he was correct, deeming the distributor failed. Now, let me explain how this distributor works. It mechanically is distributing spark via the rotor to the posts, to the spark plugs. But the reluctor wheel inside of this distributor, which is referred to as a Delco EST, that reluctor wheel inside of there actually represents the camshaft position. This module, so the camshaft is spinning at half of the speed of the crankshaft. So one 360-degree turn of the the distributor is actually 720 degrees of the crankshaft. So with that being said, let me go into the first day of this repair. So I get over there, and the scheduled job is to remove and replace the distributor in this boat. And in doing so, this is a crucial step if you're attacking this problem. There is a mark, a paint mark, on the distributor body going to the intake manifold. That position is where they set this distributor from the factory when this engine was first assembled. So there may have been a slight adjustment after the engine was started, but most likely these engines are put together. And if you're a Mercruiser or a Inmar guru, please chime in and correct me in this video with anything that I say that is not 100% correct, because I am only speaking from my gained knowledge and experience and the documentation that I was able to collect, view, and understand. So in a 720-degree circle, you have quite a bit of resolution. And in this specific fuel injection system, there is no crankshaft position sensor. There physically, in the timing cover, there is a crankshaft position sensor, but it's not hooked up to anything. And in this particular system, it has batch fire injection. So that means that you have bank 1, bank 2. It fires bank 1, bank 2, bank 1, bank 2. And depending on the demands, the milliseconds of those injectors can be trimmed either way by quite a bit. So the camshaft signal from the distributor will provide the information to inject the correct fuel based on the parameters seen by the critical sensors. So this system operates in a fashion that's called speed density. So it's factoring in coolant temperature, it's factoring in throttle position, it's factoring in manifold absolute pressure, and let's see, that's it. So when I replaced this distributor, I removed the distributor and I reinstalled the distributor, knowing that I was putting it back in nearly the exact same position. So once installed, I turned the harmonic balancer to represent 10 degrees before top dead center. And at that point, you can examine the points of the reluctor wheel, and you can see at which point that reluctor will cause a pulse. So these pulses from the distributor, they leave via a white and green wire as an AC sine wave. Now, to the computer, that is not what it wants to see. It wants to see a DC RPM signal. So the ignition module that is in the distributor is in charge of interpreting the AC signal, turning it into a RPM signal that is then sent to the MEFI 4 computer, or in this case, it's actually a 4B, and then that computer looks at the tables based on the speed density system that it's using for lookup information to determine what the correct timing value is. Now, when you're cranking the engine at slow speed, that module inside of the distributor, that is retarding the timing to ease starting. And the value is 5 degrees that it's removing. So with your base timing set at 10, you're cranking the engine at about 5 degrees. And then when it starts and it exceeds a certain RPM, then you get your run setting and you're working in what's called dynamic timing. So in replacing one of these distributors, you are basically installing a part that is critical to the computer knowing what mechanically is going on in the engine and where the position is. So I replace the distributor, I install it, I set it, I turn the key, and I get nothing. No fuel pump, and it just cranks. There's nothing going on. So I think to myself, all right, well, the distributor is now not the variable. I know that this distributor is most likely working. So I have to take that as an assumption that this distributor is doing its job, the signal is getting to the computer. Why is the fuel pump not running? Why is there no prime when I turn the key on? So the fuel pump prime is based off of turning so basically, like, if you turn the engine and that signal is seen by the computer, that is one reason for the fuel pump to run. The protocol in the computer, after every shutdown, when the computer is restarted via the key, like, I'm going to attempt to start this engine, so I turn it on, the protocol is that the fuel pump is to prime, to preload the system with the correct pressure so that when you crank the engine, you have the correct amount of fuel that goes in for the given milliseconds that it demands. And in this engine's case, I had no access to data at the time. there is a system, there's a couple different systems, but there is one mainstream system called Diacom, and it's expensive. It's not a cheap thing. It's around $700 to get something that will plug into this boat so that you can see what the computer is seeing. We'll get back to that statement later, that you can see what the computer is seeing. I'll get to it. All right, so I move forward and I say, I'm going to diagnose if the fuel pump can run, right? Because that's in my troubleshooting tree. When something doesn't work, I say to myself, can I make it work? Okay, well, if I can make it work, then why is the control circuit not doing that job? So the first step in this diagnosis was to confirm that the fuel pump is capable of working. So the customer had replaced the fuel pump because, like I said, he's a smart dude. So he replaced the fuel pump, no difference. So then, because he had no difference, he gave the fuel pump power via a hot ignition wire. So that caused the fuel pump to run, but the boat still did not start. So it was at this point that, you only have so much time to work on a boat, and then you got to cover it up and you're ending your day. Put the lift back up, close it up, cover it up, retreat to the shadows and think about what you've done. So that first night, I was very puzzled, and I thought to myself, oh no, this is going to be one of those situations. And I wasn't wrong. It was a situation. And I can tell you now, before heading further into the story, that I spent enough time on this boat that it jeopardized my entire business. And I'm not smart enough to pull out of something that's not going well, because I like to solve things and I do not give up. And that's very important in this trade. If you're not capable of pushing through the hard moments and the difficult things and stretching your knowledge till it's gone, then you don't really grow much. Growing in this trade is very painful, and it can be financially risky. So a smarter mechanic at this point would say, this is beyond me. I think that you need to get a hold of a dealer and send the boat there. So here's the catch with that. This, and like I said before, this is a friend of mine. He does all my sandblasting. He's been very good to me, and I consider him a mentor, and I appreciate his patience through this whole thing. He had faith in me. He knows my background. He knows what I do, and he said that first day, well, I've got all the faith in you, and we're gonna go with it, and we're gonna try and figure this out. Just don't lose yourself in it. Just think through it. It's got to be something simple. That's what he kept saying. Got to be something simple. He also said, I hate freaking computers. So let me start a new clip here. Sometimes it's necessary to spend the money to have access. And in this case, I didn't even get the real answer that I'm looking for. And in future repairs, I won't be so blind. Let's do this. I think it's going to be beneficial if I just start, I'll bring you through a troubleshooting tree. In case you're not familiar with troubleshooting something in the appropriate way, I do this in my brain because I'm not very good at writing things down, and it's just one of those things. So, well, this isn't going to work. All right, here we go. This is kind of working. Not really working, but it's going to work. So we've got let's do our chain of command here. We've got the ignition switch. We've got the wiring. Oh wait, above that is battery. That's spelled wrong. After wiring, we have connections. It's also spelled wrong with D. After connections, we have the physical parts that make up the prerequisites for operation. So we can call that ignition system, mechanical, and then ignition system, electrical. Now, beyond the ignition system, electrical, and mechanical systems, we have engine, mechanical. That's a variable. So basically, you're going to write out everybody involved in the party that's trying to happen. So after engine mechanical, we're going to look at fuel, and then subcategory would be pressure, and then quality. So fuel pressure, fuel quality, quantity, right? So every subject involved has an additional kind of, compounding subjects. So the ignition switch, this was ruled out by separating the main connector at the engine. So what that did is it eliminated everything from the boat. So I was able to isolate everything up in the dash, no longer a factor. Because there's a tack signal sent up there. There are power, basically you have a key on power, and then you have an ignition signal that when you turn the key, it's interpreting, okay, I'm trying to start. So having done this, I can assume that the wiring is good because I had no change. It's also written in hieroglyphics. The ignition system mechanical. So the step taken was R&R distributor, right? So that included a new cap and rotor. All right. So now, when it came to the electrical side of this, I tested the new, the reluctor, and I found that its resistance checked out. Engine mechanical. So remember how I said the crankshaft degrees are being determined by the distributor. So I did a quick test from the crankshaft damper, so damper degrees, to rotor. So in doing this, I was seeing whether or not there was excessive play in the rotor. Did I have a 10 degree difference, between the rotor moving and the crankshaft moving? No, I didn't. It was less than a degree. So now with the fuel pressure, we know we have a pump that works. We know we have pressure. We know we have fuel quality because the boat was running when it had this failure. So now quantity. We don't have any injection. So keep moving down here. Do I have a RPM signal? Now this was tough to interpret because I couldn't tell for sure whether or not the tack was able to register the cranking RPMs because I hadn't seen this work correctly, and you don't get a chance to work on every type of boat there is. So I had to assume that the tach does not read RPM signal. So instead, I took a test light and I went to the negative of the coil. Now, in the backside of the negative of the coil, when I cranked the engine, I had no pulse. All right? So we have no pulse, no RPM signal, and we have no injection, right? Those are the things that I could stand on in this diagnosis. So then I went after electrical associated with relays, you know, because the ECU is controlling the, let's see, 2 relays. So the ECU commands the fuel pump relay to both do priming and run. So there's a wire in the fuel pump relay that comes directly from the computer, and it's grounded by the computer. So right here, let's do a ground symbol. This is the point where the original diagnosis is now leaving us at a definitive answer saying ECU cannot ground that wire, because when I ground that wire, fuel pump runs. Moving on. Having completed this portion of my troubleshooting, I now know that most likely what is going on is I have an issue with the control of these systems. These systems can all be in operation, but without that ECU being able to do its job, none of these can work. So having already previously proved the operation of these things, where do I go from there? Well, having not been educated by Inmar, because this engine is actually produced by Inmar, I said, I'm going to give them a call. So next step, call mothership. Right? So I get on the horn with 1-800 ? Because that's basically, they were asking me more questions than they were answering. And when I was on the phone with him, I said, I believe I have a bad ECU because it's not capable of doing its job and it has all the prerequisites. Have you had any experience with this? No, never. These ECUs don't fail. All right. What do you suggest I do? Well, do you have diagnostic software? No, I have a brain and tools, and that's it. All right, well, you're not going to get very far. Okay. So having found that the mothership was not going to really be much of any assistance, I then went to YouTube. So on YouTube, this is where I found MaicSalazarDiagnostics. I think it's with an S. Sorry, Mike, if I messed that up. So I researched mefi 4, which is multi-port electronic fuel injection, 4th try. And no fuel pump, no prime. And that is how my troubleshooting tree actually led me to this man. So I watched one of his videos that was concerning a similar computer, and I listened to what he was saying, and I saw what he was doing, and he has an entire bench test setup where he can hook up one of these computers and simulate the sensor values, and the computer will run, and he's able to monitor what it's doing and what it's not doing. Having found this man, I commented on his video saying, I'm in big trouble, I need help, how do I find you? So he called me, and it was surprising to me because it was like almost 11 o'clock at night. And he called me, and we talked about this, and he said, I feel like you have an issue with this computer and you need to send it to me. And I said, yeah, I agree. Okay, so then I get it past the customer. I tell the customer, this is what I want to do. I want to send it to this magician, and I want him to look at it. And if it's repairable, he's going to repair it and then send it back. And then we can rule out the ECU, the engine control unit, or in this case, the engine not controlling unit, otherwise known as a brick. A $3,000 brick. Sorry, it's cold in here. I can't write at all. All right. So ECU travels to Virginia. Mike deems ECU not able to run. He then repairs the ECU, tests it, ECU runs.
Fully operational. Let me see if we have any fault codes to go by, because I forgot to do that on the first capture, and I didn't even send or save the data. Let me see what codes we have in history. Okay, we have multiple codes. ESD has an open circuit. ESD has a shorted circuit. So it's definitely, like I said, it was something on the ESD circuit. Manifold pressure low, pump. The other ones I can disregard because the computer wasn't running. So those are these things that we can erase. And then all cat high. I don't know exactly what that will be. It all depends on the calibration. ESD has an open circuit. Again, if the computer is firing, and here it might not like exactly the ESD module because it's not original that I have, and that could prevent or flag that fault, but we can see that the signal is present, so I can disregard that fault. That's not a problem. But let me again, this is very unique, and I have done this millions of times with no issues. So let me raise the RPM. So right now we're in 3,300, almost 3,200, sorry, RPMs, and we can see injector and coil firing perfectly, not an issue. So this computer is definitely 100% fully repaired now. Before, we didn't have any of these signals. I'm going to come down to idle one more time. I didn't change anything else because it's not really necessary. I can see the computer working perfectly, so I'm just going to turn it off one more time. I'm going to turn the crank sensor signal off, right? Turn the ignition off, turn the computer completely off, and I'm going to power it back on to see that fuel pump. Yeah, we can see the fuel pump activation, and let's run it again. Now this time in a correct idle, because at first it was very low, but that's just the way this, and actually I turn it off and might have to go back again. Yeah, I'm in 152. If I turn the power, you see, if I turn the power on this simulator, it goes to that very low RPM. I'm trying to go slowly to not lose the crankshaft sensor signal for a little bit or anything to keep you guys on the screen. All right, so we're there. But we can see, you know, injection, coil, everything is fired perfectly. And I can tell you that the problem is not in here, because if I turn the cam sensor signal off, let's go over to these fault codes and I erase it. You see, they're gone. So this is definitely not because something is not connected, or it doesn't really like that module that I have connected here, but the computer is running in perfect unison injector is the clean, very clean signal. So Jeremy, actually this computer is in very good shape. I didn't find anything burned or exploded, so I would recommend you to definitely check the circuit in the ESC signal to the module from the crankshaft position sensor signal, or from the ignition module to the computer, because it could be either position, right? That could have damaged this and create your problem. The rest, it was vibration and that gel pushed to the side, and I have already corrected that. I'm just going to clean the cover and send a link for payment to you and send this computer so we can finalize. So the way that Jeremy, I think, wants to do is use my video as a part and then put his final thoughts on his own. When he does that, I'm going to let you have a link in here so we can see also what he did on there on his end. All right, guys. So
then it comes back to me. I install it in the boat. Engine immediately. I'm writing like a doctor because I think they get paid enough that if they can write like this, I can write like that. Boat engine immediately starts. Okay, that's great. The next step in this procedure is to set base timing. 10 degrees. All right. I do this. I find online that I can jump the terminals A and B, and that will initiate base timing. So now, with the timing light, I set at 10 degrees. I then remove the jumper, and I'll put a video in here of what the engine would do. So as soon as the jumper was removed, the engine would calm right down to idle. It would idle at 750, 760 for about 10 to 15 seconds. So from the point of removing the jumper, we get normal operation. RPM comes down from 1200 or so down to 700, stabilizes, and at about the 30-second mark, so between 15 and 30 seconds, we get what I could only describe as a stall recovery. All right. So at this point, I can hear what's going on, I can see what's going on, and I don't know what's going on, because it's like it would idle down and then it would stutter and then it would almost stall and then it would recover, and it would recover at like a extremely high it basically was overreacting to what was going on. So in my mind at this point, I'm saying I've got a sensor issue. Okay, so a sensor issue is a big deal, because the computer needs to see good information to make good decisions, just like us in life. So right now, I am taking for granted ECU is good. This is very important. It's part of a troubleshooting tree. When you replace a part, you have to take it as known good and proceed until you know for a fact that it's not. So I struggle with this scenario, and I go back to the boat about 4 times. And each time I do this, I'm investing about 5 or 6 hours of my life, because there's travel, and then I have to uncover the boat, I have to put the boat down in the water, I have to set up my timing light, I got to bring my tools, and then I have to, at this point, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mathematically set it. So I found data on the internet that is saying that the desired spec is the cam retard angle. Now, this cam retard angle is for a very specific reason.
Quick correction. The camshaft retard angle is there to give the computer enough lead time to make corrections, including advanced ignition before the rotor is actually at its destination, so that it can control spark despite the rotor not being able to adjust to the position that would be ideal. It can still fire it at the desired timing point, just to be clear.
In between your 8 posts in a circle, you have 45 degrees between those 2 posts. Say this is cylinder 2, and this would be cylinder 1. So 5, 7, 2, 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2, and so on. So what we're looking to do here is set that rotor so that when it makes a 45-degree adjustment to the timing, it's not going to crossfire to the wrong cylinder. That's all we're trying to accomplish. So at the crankshaft, we've got 10 degrees at the crankshaft. So at the camshaft, 10 degrees is 20. So that's within the window. And the spec that it's looking for is 45 degrees plus or minus a half a degree. So it's a very small window that they're looking to have you set it. And the plus or minus is accounting for gear wear, timing chain, so on and so forth, rotor, slop. But you got to try and get it right in the middle. So I start at the balancer, and Inmar had suggested to me that the harmonic balancer had slipped, and the 0, the TDC mark on the balancer, was offset. I said, all right, that would be the first time I've ever seen that. I mean, when a harmonic balancer fails, it's usually not part of the engine anymore. But I'll believe it. So I went ahead, followed their advice, and I installed a piston stop so that when I came up to my mark and it hits the piston stop about here, and then I go back the other way and it hits the piston stop about there, I know that 0 is 0. So moving on from now, let's check that, check that. I know for a fact that I've installed this distributor on the correct tooth, at the correct spot, at the correct time, and I even had lunch that day. So I know that mechanically, go back to my list here, engine mechanical, check, damper, check, right? So this is when I knew I was dealing with a monster. So trying not to take too much time to describe this, but it took me probably 100 hours of scratching my head to actually figure this out. So please bear with me, and I swear there's an important lesson in this. So I call up MSD, MaicSalazarDiagnostics. I tell him what's going on, and at this point, I don't get a reply because he just happened to be on a vacation. So I'm kind of stuck, and I know what I want to do, but I also have pressure from the customer because summer is coming to a close and they want to use their boat, and I have basically come up against a wall. So here's the brick wall, right? We got a brick wall, and I haven't been able to talk to Mike. So in this brick wall area, I kind of just did this. I just kept circling the drain, and at this point, I wanted to send the computer back to him, but I felt that it has to be something simple. It has to be something I'm missing. So now, because I can't get a hold of him, I dive into diagnostic assistance from somebody that knows more than me. I hate to do it. I don't like it when people call me and bug me, but you know what? There's times where you have to call somebody that has most likely been in this scenario. So I get on the phone with a guy from Florida. We're going to call him A. This man is a Mercury racing mechanic of 35 years, I believe. So I start bringing him through my troubleshooting, and he says that he hasn't seen very many of these computers fail. He doubts the computer, very robust. But what I'm explaining to him is very confusing. And at the same time that he's saying it's not the computer, he's saying if it is not a sensor, if it is not a loose pin, if it is not a basically a fault in the system, then it has to be the computer. So here's where we get into, this is a box. This is a box that I'm going to represent as not good, right? And when you're in this box, you're just going to keep going around and around and around. And this box represents corrupt ECU. Now, what a corrupt ECU is an ECU that cannot blame itself. It cannot see the problem. It cannot blame a certain part of the system. And its code makes enough sense to it that it cannot register a checksum error. So 42 is WTF for the ECU. This is the code that should register if the lines of code don't make sense to the ECU. So at this time, running the boat, and I'll tell you that the main weird symptom is that when you would try to rev up the engine, even though it would idle very fine and it would do this loop where it was doing this massive correction and then it would idle smooth and then massive correction and then idle smooth. At no point in time could you rev up this engine without experiencing pinging, knocking, and almost like a soft rev limit, which I can put a video of here of what that sounds like. So what my brain says in my box of despair here, corrupt ECU despair. That's what we'll call this. So in my mind right now, because we're not getting a 42, and I'm saying WTF, what I feel is going on is that the sensor value is correct at the sensor. It's giving the correct information to the computer, but the computer is interpreting the value incorrectly. So I've only heard of this maybe once or twice in my career of 20 years, where you have a lookup table, right? You have X, Y. So Y is going this way, X going this way. There is a very rare case where one of these axes can get flipped. So when that flips, the ECU, when it's adding timing, is actually removing, or when it sees density increase, it interprets it as decreasing. So this could affect your coolant temperature, it could affect your throttle position, it could affect whatever. So I start testing sensors. I go through every one of these sensors and I check them off, check them off, check them off. I've got this baro sensor that doesn't seem to be moving much. It's moving, but not much. I've also got a air temperature reading of -40. So -40. This, I didn't know at the time, but is erroneous. It doesn't need to know air temperature because it's judging density, which gives it a rough estimate of temperature. So I had to kind of ignore that. Let me speed this up a little bit. So after Mike gets back from AK, and we got a plane, he lands, he calls me. Got a little telephone here. He calls me and he says, send it back. I need to look at it. I say, okay, good as in the mail. He gets it back, he puts it on his equipment, and he says, 100%, this file, the calibration file, is screwed. He takes this file out of the computer, he finds a correct file for this computer and reloads it. New file. He sends it back, I install, and this is just yesterday. Boat immediately starts. Now I started this boat up in base timing mode. It immediately started up. No issue, no skip, no nothing. So I look and I grab my timing light, and I was only 2 degrees off of perfect. Okay, so I take it out of base timing and it calms down, and that was it. So all through this, we had this. We had an ECU that was a brick. And even though I sent it to him and he was able to he made a repair on the ECU. Now, the damage on the ECU was caused by something. Remember how I said the distributor generates an AC wave? So not this kind of wave. The AC wave is more like that. So this type of wave is damaging if there's an issue with the distributor where power, AC power, can actually be leaked through the module that has the job of converting it from this to this. And explained by MSD, if there is a spike, because this is normal, but if you have a spike, big spike, and in the line of code you have zeros and ones, 0, 1, so it's basically on, off, right? But if you have a 0, when that happens, it can now be a 1. Now, the checksum error, if it runs through this code and it's able to get through it without, some crazy, it's not completing an action, it just shuts off or whatever, it's not going to identify that as a problem. And if this code right here is connected to your lookup table, it can flip the value on one of the axes. So when MSD ran it on his computer, he verified. Well, unfortunately, my phone is getting older, and its battery has said no more today, so I can't even use the microphone, and I know how you guys really like it when I don't use a microphone. So we'll just continue on here. Where was I? So Mike gets the computer, he looks at it, and he says he was immediately able to see what it was doing. And I said, okay, what was it doing? So basically when the engine would idle down, it was taking away timing. And which is okay, because we're slowing down. But what it would do, it would miss its target by a certain amount. So instead of settling at 10 degrees, the ECU would drag it all the way down to like 20 degrees after. So because this happened, and the RPM is too low, the IAC would open up, 150 counts, give it all kinds of air, and giving it all kinds of air would prevent the stall, and then it would cycle again. So the computer was in
a loop that it couldn't correct. And because of this loop, the 10-degree setting was irrelevant. Didn't care. So even though I was setting this correctly, because there was a flipped value in the calibration file of the ECU, no one could ever fix this. There's no fixing this. So he takes a known good file that he checks, he reflashes the computer with the known good file, and then it's fixed. So let's see. Right here. Not good. Not giving this value, or not giving this code. Not reporting any codes. That was a clue. Big clue. What else? And again, this is only to try to help people that are similar or in similar situations, because I had to do a lot of expensive learning here. And it's not like I can charge the customer for all of this. I mean, you'd think that I could, but I'm not Mercury Racing. I'm not Inmar. I'm not a dealer. I'm a private individual that has scratched most of the hair off of my head dealing with stuff like this. In the end, the true value in this repair is that it's resolved now. The boat runs correctly, customer's happy. I'm thrilled to not have to think about it much more. But the true value in this is relaying this information to other people that may be dealing with the same situation. I can tell you that I watched every video on YouTube that has something to do with this so that I could thoroughly understand what I was working with, so that I could understand that it was nothing to do with the boat. Was the cause of the issue the boat, or the cause of the issue an ECU that had a time-delayed failure? I think it was a mixture of both. A poor condition distributor that was able to generate AC voltage and rewrite code at a very specific moment where the computer was damaged. So, what the lesson of this video is, I'm just going to write it down. I like using paper. I don't know how to spell this, but it's called Hackham's Razor. It was written by much smarter people than me. But basically, it puts you in this box. The simplest answer is often the correct one. So, if you feel hot, then you're probably hot. If you feel cold, you're probably cold. It comes down to that. When I knew that the ECU was not performing its task, I knew the ECU was damaged. So what did I do wrong? I assumed. And that makes an ass out of you and me. So I assumed that the ECU and the file were good. Because why would it not be? He just gave it back to me, says it runs, and it doesn't. So, I'm not saying MSD missed it. Because he didn't know to look for it. So how could he check the box that I didn't show him? He made the computer work. I got it back. fuel pump primed, injectors ran, engine ran. So then, no matter what, no matter who was dealing with it, the troubleshooting tree starts over, and then you just throw it all out the window when none of it matters. In the end, you prove out the electrical, you prove out the theory, you prove out the mechanical. It has to be the computer. This is a valuable lesson for anybody that is entering this trade. And I can't speak to the modern technology, but I can say that all computer systems have the same basic information-based decision system. So if you're giving the computer the correct information and the hardware is all working and it's not performing its task, then you have to blame the software. So hindsight being 2020, if I run into this again, I have all of the precursors to identify that this problem's going on. So I hope you guys take away that from this video and you have a little bit more insight to a troubleshooting tree. Even though I can't really write with, my fingers, they turn nuts and bolts and they cut metal and weld it back together, and they don't write much. So excuse me for being kind of messy in this, but I just took 2 hours of my day to digress on this for the benefit of others that may be stuck in this scenario. So having become an expert on the MEFI 4 system and the indmar variant, and this one's called the Monsoon 340, very rare engine, only existed in 05. Weird. If you have an issue with one of these boats and you think that you're in a similar scenario, try to briefly describe what you do and don't have going on with your boat in the comments section, and either I or even Mike's channel, check out MaicSalazarDiagnostics, and just watch some of his videos concerning the computer that you're working with, and it might give you a bit of information that leads you down the path that you didn't look to take, because it's there, but you might miss it, and you might just keep going in circles. So I got plenty more coming on this channel as far as entertainment goes, but I will tell you right now that I started this channel for a very specific reason many years ago. I wanted to leave a living library of information to help people based on my gained knowledge and experience. So I really appreciate it. I hope somebody gets, some helpful information out of this. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, now's the perfect time. If I helped you, help me. And I'd really like to grow this channel a bit more and just share what I've got, because there's a lot more to share. And it's hard being a self-employed individual, supporting your business and running it to the best of your ability, and then taking your extra time and putting it into YouTube. And I don't really make money from this. I mean, I'm a YouTube partner, but I don't really see them helping. So have a good evening, good night, good morning whenever you're watching this, and I hope to see you in the future. So this is a video after many hours of work. I got the boat to run this well, and it was the best it ever ran, but it still would not start in dynamic timing. So what do you think you would have done at this point? Let me know in the comment section.